Welcome to the Deep Dive. We sift through some really fascinating sources, trying to pull out the most important insights and maybe some surprising facts for you.
Absolutely.
Today, we're really embarking on something quite unique, I think. Taking a fresh look, almost a ufological perspective, you could say, at the New Testament. We're diving into material that, well, it challenges the traditional interpretations of some really well-known biblical events. It offers a different angle on what might have actually happened.
Yeah, a different lens entirely.
And look, our aim here isn't about diminishing anyone's faith.
Yeah.
Not at all. It's more about fostering a more conscious, maybe a more informed spirituality, inviting us to think about anomalies that, well, science hasn't quite explained yet.
Precisely. And for this deep dive, we're shifting focus a bit. We've talked about the Old Testament before,
Right.
but now our attention is really squarely on the Gospels, on the experiences of Jesus, or Emmanuel, as he's often called in these parallel sources, and his apostles. Yeah. And this whole exploration, it really opens up a pretty profound question, doesn't it? Could there have been, extraterrestrial presences involved? Or was Jesus himself perhaps a being from another dimension altogether?
That's a huge question to start with. Okay, let's dive right in and maybe start at the beginning. The narrative of Jesus' birth and specifically his genealogy in the book of Matthew. There are some details there that many people probably just skim over.
Oh, definitely. And what's quite remarkable when you look closely at that lineage is the significant inclusion of women, which was unusual for the time.
Maybe that is a joke.
Consider someone like Rahab. The sources point out she was a prostitute from Jericho, yet she marries a king, becomes a key part of Jesus' ancestry.
Incredible.
Then there's Ruth, who notably wasn't Jewish. She's in there too. And Bathsheba, King David's wife, formerly Uriah's wife. She became Solomon's mother, noted for her intelligence.
All right.
Our sources also bring up Esther, Queen of Xerxes, another really strong female figure in that whole historical picture.
So what's the significance of highlighting these women?
Well, these sources suggest these women, especially in that patriarchal context, they represent something deeper. An agricultural people, deeply connected to Gaia, the Earth's feminine energy. And the Kundalini, this sort of primal life force energy. They're seen as linked to these ancient lines of priestesses, pythonesses, women holding spiritual wisdom, maybe even prophetic abilities. Think like the Oracle of Delphi, that kind of lineage.
Fascinating connection.
Yeah.
And then, okay, the Magi arrive. Now, the Bible, it doesn't actually say three kings, does it? Or even that there were three of them.
No, not at all. Those traditional names we hear, like Balthazar, Melchior, Gaspar, they're basically fictitious additions later on. Same with the idea they came from Africa or Egypt.
So what does the Bible say?
It simply calls them magos,
Yep.
which is Greek for wise men or sages. And it says they came from the East, specifically Persia. And our sources really emphasize Persia as a cradle of magic, known for its profound esoteric traditions.
Right, a center of ancient wisdom. Okay, so what about the Star of Bethlehem? That's central to the story.
It is, and the analysis in these sources is, quite intriguing. They argue it couldn't have been a comet, like Halley's, or a meteor. Why? Because of its reported behavior stopping, guiding, pinpointing a location.
That doesn't sound like any normal star or comet.
Exactly. They also dismiss the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction theory. It's popular, but the timing doesn't really work. That conjunction happens roughly every 800 years, and it just doesn't line up neatly with the estimated time of Jesus' birth.
So what's the key detail then?
The thing that really stands out, even in the biblical text, is that the star didn't just appear overhead. It explicitly threw a beam of light onto the manger.
A beam of light, like a spotlight.
Sort of, yeah. Suggesting a controlled directional light source, something far beyond what you'd expect from a natural celestial event.
Okay, that is a crucial distinction. And our sources, they propose a pretty radical alternative here, don't they?
They do. They suggest the star might have actually been a great dimensional ship, a type of craft.
A ship that brought Jesus to Earth.
That's the idea presented, that according to this parallel information, Jesus didn't birth in the conventional sense. He arrived, possibly as an older child, maybe around 12, already embodying a significant presence.
Wow. And Joseph and Mary.
They were directed, according to these sources, to the exact arrival point, and the Magi, who are described interestingly as seated partners, or maybe beings from Genos.
Genos. What does that mean?
It seems to refer to advanced beings, or maybe souls with a deep, possibly ancestral or even genetic link to Earth's spiritual evolution. They were also guided to meet him. And this whole perspective, the sources argue, it really changes how you might interpret the role of the Virgin Mary theologically.
It certainly shifts the focus. Okay, so if we accept that framework for a moment, what about the gifts? Gold, incense, myrrh, how do they fit in?
Well, traditional theology connects them to Jesus as priest, prophet, and king, which is, a standard interpretation.
Yeah.
But these sources, they suggest a much deeper, more elemental meaning. The Magi, being masters of elements in this view, presented gifts representing fundamental forces.
Okay, break that down. Gold.
Gold represents the plenitude, the highest evolution of the earth element. It's seen as its most perfected mineral form.
Makes sense. Myrrh.
Myrrh is a plant extract. It's a liquid resin, so it represents the water element and also our deep connection to the plant kingdom, to life.
And incense?
Incense is also plant-derived, but you need fire to release its essence, its smoke, so that signifies the fire element.
Earth, water, fire. So what's the implication?
By offering these three, the Magi were essentially recognizing and reverencing Jesus as the fifth element.
The fifth element, like ether, spirit.
Exactly. Etheric matter, the spiritual plane itself, the essence that animates and connects all the physical elements. They weren't just giving expensive gifts, they were acknowledging his fundamental nature, his mastery over these realms.
That's a completely different way of looking at those gifts. Really powerful.
It shifts the meaning significantly, doesn't it?
It really does. Okay, this also brings us to another murky area. Jesus' actual birth date. There's confusion around the calendars. The shift from the Julian calendar, the older Roman one. What do the sources say about this?
Yes, the calendar confusion. It's a fascinating bit of history. So Pope John I, back in 532 AD, he asked a monk, Dionysius Exiguus, to figure out the birth year.
To establish year 1 AD.
Precisely. And the calculation was based on assuming Jesus started his mission at age 30 and died at 33. Seems logical, right?
Yeah, on the surface.
But then, almost 1,000 years later, around the 16th century, another monk digs into it and finds a pretty significant error.
An error? What kind?
He looked at the writings of the historian Flavius Josephus, and Josephus recorded the death of King Herod the Great before the calculated birth year of Christ.
Oh, that's a problem. Herod plays a big role in the nativity story.
Exactly. He was supposed to be alive after Jesus was born. This discrepancy suggests there might be a gap, maybe around 7 years.
7 years. So if that's right, what year would it actually be now?
Well, according to these sources, if you add that potential gap, we might actually be living in, say, 2028 right now, not 2025.
Whoa. Huh. Okay, that's a big difference.
Yeah.
But could it just be an honest mistake? A simple miscalculation?
It could be. But the sources raise an important question. Could this calendar error have been intentional?
Intentional? Why?
They speculate it might have been a deliberate manipulation, perhaps designed to disconnect us from natural cycles like solar and lunar rhythms, to make us feel a bit lost in time and space, maybe? Separated from the cosmic clock, so to speak.
That's a provocative thought. Disconnecting us from natural time. Okay, so if we pull all these threads together, the arrival, the Magi, the calendar, what does it start to suggest about Jesus' abilities, his so-called miracles?
Well, the sources don't really frame them as miracles in the supernatural sense. They describe them more as manifestations of a highly advanced mental technology.
Mental technology, like mind over matter.
Essentially, yes.
I'm out.
But maybe more sophisticated than we usually think of it. And what's key is he didn't just possess this ability, he actively taught it.
Taught it to his apostles.
Yes. And interestingly, these sources emphasize it was a larger group than just the 12 men we usually picture. It included women, too, playing significant roles.
Okay, that fits with the earlier point about female figures. So what kind of technology are we talking about?
Well, think about Jesus' teaching, "In my Father's house are many mansions," from the Gospel of John.
Yeah, I know that passage, usually interpreted as levels of heaven or something.
Right. But these sources suggest it's much more literal. Not just spiritual realities, but actual multiverses, other planets, other dimensions. A direct implication that life exists abundantly beyond just Earth.
Wow. Okay.
And remember, Jesus himself said, "My kingdom is not of this world." In this context, that sounds less like a metaphor and more like a statement of origin from another reality.
That paints a very different picture of God compared to, say, the Old Testament depictions sometimes.
Absolutely. Less wrathful, perhaps more expansive. And what's really compelling is how modern physics, quantum mechanics, string theory, they're actually starting to grapple with these very concepts now. Parallel universes, extra dimensions.
Science catching up to ancient wisdom, perhaps.
Or catching up to what these parallel sources have been describing all along. They even talk about advanced dimensional partners using something called magnetic mesh technology, some kind of sophisticated energy field manipulation to travel almost instantly across vast distances.
Magnetic mesh technology. That sounds straight out of sci-fi. But maybe.
Maybe not. It ties into this idea of mastering energy and matter, which brings us to another really powerful statement Jesus made. Oh, our gods.
Right. John 10.34. He was quoting Psalm 82. That's often explained away, isn't it?
It often is, interpreted as just highlighting human fallibility or something. But these sources say, no, that's not the point. It's about our inherent potential, our potential for what they call transmutation.
Transmutation. What exactly does that mean in this context? Is it like alchemy?
Sort of, but on a biological level, it's described as the process of accelerating our own matter, evolving our physical being beyond its current density.
Accelerating our matter. To what end?
To transcend physical limitations, maybe shift form, maybe even convert the physical body into pure energy. Think about that E-Man-CR relationship. Matter and energy are interchangeable if you reach the right conditions.
So faith wasn't just belief for Jesus.
Not passive belief, no. According to this view, faith was this mental technology. It was, as the sources put it, an hour of action.
An hour of action.
Remember when he said, "My Father is working and I am working"? He said that defending his actions, his work on the Sabbath, he was showing that the divine, the God, is constant movement, constant creative action.
So it challenges that idea of just being subservient, waiting for salvation.
Fundamentally, it suggests the goal isn't subservience, but active development. Developing our innate paranormality, which is just a word for these latent abilities like healing, telepathy, maybe controlling elements.
Paranormality, like psychic abilities.
Yeah. Yes, but maybe seen as natural potentials, not supernatural. The goal is achieving life in abundance, as Jesus said, becoming, potentially, much more than Christ was as part of this larger wave, those 144,000 dimensional beings, mentioned in some texts, who supposedly prepared his way. True salvation, then, is about actively unlocking this potential.
And his own actions demonstrated this, like controlling the elements.
Exactly. Think about him calming that violent storm on the Sea of Galilee, or walking on water. Those are classic examples of mastery over physical laws as we know them.
And Peter tried walking on water too, didn't he? He managed it for a bit.
He did, and that's a key point. It shows it wasn't unique to Jesus. Peter achieved it, even if briefly, suggesting there was a specific training protocol involved. It wasn't just a random miracle. It was a learnable skill.
A skill developed through
what?
Mental focus.
Mental acceleration is how the sources term it, reaching a state they call cycling above 27 beta cycles per second. That's a specific brainwave frequency, much higher than normal waking consciousness. It suggests a heightened state of conscious control, maybe like deep meditation, but actively applied to the external world.
Wow. Okay. This leads us to think about the transfiguration, doesn't it? Yeah. On Mount Tabor.
A very significant event. His clothes become impossibly white, dazzling, and then Moses and Elijah appear and talk with him.
Right. But wait, Moses died, didn't he? According to Deuteronomy 34, he died and was buried before the Israelites entered the Promised Land.
That's the biblical account, yes. So the obvious question is, how could he physically appear on Mount Tabor if he was dead and buried?
Good question. How do the sources explain that?
They suggest that both Moses and Elijah didn't die in the conventional sense. They transmuted. They accelerated their matter into energy, just as we were discussing.
So they achieved that state of transmutation themselves.
That's the interpretation offered, that they could then materialize, appear in a recognizable form, even though their physical bodies had essentially dematerialized or ascended previously. The Bible doesn't explicitly state this for Moses, like it hints for Elijah, but this event suggests it.
But doesn't that conflict with other parts of the Old Testament? Like the prohibition against talking to the dead. Saul was condemned for consulting the python, the medium at Endor.
It absolutely does conflict. And this contradiction, the sources argue, highlights how the original teachings might have been altered or selectively edited later on, particularly when the Roman Empire adopted and shaped Christianity.
You mean they suppressed certain ideas?
Possibly. Deemed some texts apocryphal, hidden, or unofficial while including others. It created inconsistencies. For instance, the canonical Book of Jude actually quotes from an apocryphal text, the Assumption of Moses, which describes Satan disputing over Moses' body. So even the official texts sometimes rely on the unofficial ones. It points to a complex, maybe even political process of choosing what became scripture.
That really makes you question the neat divisions we often assume. And didn't Peter mention something similar about Jesus interacting with the dead?
Yes, in his first letter, Peter writes that after his crucifixion, Jesus went and preached to the spirits in prison, specifically those who were disobedient in the time of Noah.
Preaching to the dead in Hades or Sheol.
Exactly. Which again supports this idea of Jesus operating beyond our normal understanding of life and death, interacting with parallel realities, different dimensional layers or rings connected to the Earth system, as these sources describe it.
So this all builds towards his own resurrection or post-crucifixion appearances, like in the cenacle, the upper room.
Right. A pivotal moment. He appears to the disciples even though the doors are locked shut. He materializes. The sources describe it as him manifesting as pure energy, which then recoalesces into form.
Pure energy, like that Esion idea again.
Precisely. Matter accelerated to the speed of light squared becomes energy, and the reverse is also true. Energy can become matter. He demonstrates this. And importantly, when Thomas doubts, Jesus tells him to touch his wounds, saying, "A ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see I have."
So not a ghost, but a physical yet different body.
A glorious body is the term used, distinct from a disembodied spirit. This is entirely consistent with the description of ascended beings in these sources, beings who've mastered transmutation and can dematerialize and materialize their form at will.
Okay, now, here's where things get really radical, according to these sources. The crucifixion itself.
Yes. This is perhaps the most challenging assertion for traditional views. The parallel sources claim the crucifixion was essentially a mounted scenario, a kind of theater.
You mean it wasn't real?
Real in the sense that it happened, but perhaps not in the way it's usually understood. The sources state quite clearly that a being who has achieved transmutation, like Jesus, who had already demonstrated a differentiated body at the Transfiguration well, such a being cannot die in the conventional sense.
Cannot die, so the death on the cross.
Was a deliberate, programmed event, not a defeat, but a demonstration, designed to provide a profound shock of conscience to humanity.
A shock. To show what?
To demonstrate the path to eternal life, to show mastery over death itself, and to prove that he held ultimate control over his own life and death. Remember that earlier incident where the crowd tried to throw him off a cliff and he just calmly walked through them and went on his way?
Right. He seemed untouchable then.
It suggests his death was also a choice, a powerful teaching moment, not a tragic, unavoidable end. It wasn't about appeasing an angry God through suffering.
So the emphasis on passion as intense suffering, that might be a distortion.
That's exactly what these sources argue. That the later distortion of passion into primarily meaning suffering like you see in interpretations of the Book of Job or parts of Isaiah, fosters what they call a vibration of poverty and subservience.
A vibration of poverty.
A mindset of lack, limitation, and helplessness, which, they argue, fundamentally contradicts Jesus' actual message of life in abundance, liberation, and empowerment. His life was meant as an example of mastery, not passive victimhood.
So his ascension fits into this too, not just floating up to heaven.
Right. The sources describe the ascension as the final act, the ending of his transmutation, the complete acceleration and transformation of his physical form. It wasn't just a spiritual departure. It was the culmination of his mastery over matter.
And he told his apostles to continue their training.
Yes. He instructed them to wait for the promise of the Father, the empowerment to continue this work, and he promised that many of them would not see death in the conventional way and would be with him in his second coming, which these sources often interpret not just as a future event, but as the closing of a great cosmic cycle, one we might be in the midst of right now.
Wow. There's so much there. And you mentioned earlier the role of women. Did the sources elaborate on that, especially around Jesus himself?
They do. They highlight the absolutely pivotal role of women, specifically referring to a lineage or group sometimes called the 13th tribe of Ophiuchus, connected to serpent wisdom, healing also sometimes termed the Amazons in this context.
Ophiuchus.
Yes.
A serpent bear constellation.
Exactly. Representing a lineage of powerful, spiritually attuned women who are said to have prepared Jesus' path, maybe even genetically or energetically.
And Mary Magdalene?
She figures prominently. Some sources state quite directly that Jesus continued his transmutation work with Mary Magdalene, particularly in Saqqara, Egypt, a place of ancient energy and initiation.
With her. As partners.
Yes. And they go further, stating they were married and had children, which of course profoundly challenges the conventional celibate image.
Married with children. That changes everything. It connects back to that lineage idea, too.
It does. And it also relates to another ability mentioned, transfiguration in the sense of changing physical appearance.
Changing how he looked.
Yes. The sources suggest Jesus could alter his form, which is why Judas had to identify him specifically with a kiss in the garden. His appearance wasn't always fixed or easily recognizable.
Like shape-shifting.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
It's an ability seen in other ancient accounts, too, like stories of Merlin and traditions like the Mists of Avalon. It involves manifesting a physical form, potentially from ectoplasm, this sort of subtle energy substance, allows for appearing differently as needed.
Okay, one more thing, teleportation. You mentioned travel. Were there biblical examples of that, too?
Absolutely. The sources point to examples often overlooked. Habakkuk, the prophet, was reportedly transported instantly from Judea to Babylon, that's nearly 1,000 kilometers just by the speed of thought, to bring food to Daniel in the lion's den.
Instant travel.
And then there's Philip, one of the apostles. After baptizing the Ethiopian official, who, interestingly, these sources identify not as a eunuch, but as the king of Lalibela, the one who founded those incredible rock-hewn churches in Ethiopia.
The king of Lalibela. That's a specific claim.
It is, and apparently the Ethiopian Orthodox Church uses a Bible that includes texts like the Book of Enoch, suggesting a different stream of tradition. Anyway, after meeting this king, Philip is instantly transported away to the city of Azotus.
So these abilities, healing, speaking in tongues, teleportation, transmutation, they weren't just rare miracles.
According to these sources, no, they were manifestations of this mental acceleration, this advanced conscious control. And the early Christians, at least some of them, actively trained and lived with these paranormal abilities as part of their spiritual development. It was part of the path.
We have covered an incredible amount of ground today, really explored some perspectives on the New Testament that definitely challenged standard interpretations.
It's a lot to take in, for sure. Peeling back layers, re-examining things we thought we knew.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe leave our listeners with one final thought, something to chew on.
Okay. Building on everything we've discussed, consider this provocative idea. What happens when the truth of an original, powerful message gets deliberately distorted? Maybe to serve a different agenda.
Distortion, like adding noise to the signal.
Exactly. Think about Jesus' own parable of the wheat and tares, the weeds sown among the good crop. These sources suggest that figures like Paul of Tarsus, originally Saul, who, importantly, never actually walked with Jesus during his physical mission, might have inadvertently or perhaps deliberately introduced tares.
Manipulations into the message.
Manipulations or shifts in emphasis, particularly as Christianity became integrated into the Roman Empire. This, the argument goes, could have led away from personal empowerment and towards institutionalized religion, towards a message sometimes centered on dependence, obligation, maybe even fear.
Instead of the liberation Jesus intended.
Instead of the profound liberation and individual potential that seems to have been at the core of his actual teaching, it really makes you reflect on his famous words, doesn't it? Know the truth, and the truth will set you free. What is that truth, and how clearly are we seeing it today?